Chapter 11, Section 4: Attacks, Counterattacks, and Signaling. Attacks and counterattacks. In the form of price cuts, advertising campaigns, market entries, and new product introductions, attack can be defined as an initial set of actions to gain competitive advantage, and an initial set of actions to gain competitive advantage in counterattack is consequently defined as a set of actions in response to attack. This section focuses on a key question: what kinds of attack are more likely to be successful? Obviously, unopposed attacks are more likely to be successful. Thus, attackers need to be aware of the three drivers for counterattacks: awareness, motivation, and capability. If an attack is so subtle that rivals are not aware of it, attackers' objectives are likely to be attained. One interesting idea is the blue ocean strategy that avoids attacking core markets defended by rivals. A trust on rivals' core markets is very likely to result in a bloody price war, in other words, a red ocean. In the 1990s, Netscape drew tremendous publicity by labeling Microsoft the Death Star and predicting that the internet would make Windows obsolete. Such a challenge helped make Netscape Microsoft's number one enemy, leading to the demise of Netscape or its drowning in the red ocean. Motivation is also crucial. If the attacked market is of marginal value, managers may decide not to counterattack. Consider how China's Haier entered the U.S. white goods market. Although Haier dominates its home country with a broad range of products, it chose to enter the U.S. market in the most non-threatening segment: minibars. Minibars are compact refrigerators for hotels and dorms. Do you remember the brand of the minibar in the last hotel room you were staying? Evidently, not only did you fail to pay attention to that brand, but incumbents such as GE and Whirlpool also dismissed the segment as peripheral and low margin. In other words, they were not motivated to counterattack. Thanks in part to the incumbents' lack of motivation to counterattack, Haier now commands a 50% U.S. market share in compact refrigerators and has built a factory in South Carolina to go after more lucrative product lines. Even if an attack is identified and a firm is motivated to respond, it requires strong capabilities to carry out the counterattack, as discussed in our early section on resources. Overall, minimizing an opponent's awareness, motivation, and capabilities is more likely to result in successful attacks. Frontal, infrequent, and predictable attacks typically find rivals well prepared. Winning firms excel at making subtle, frequent, but unpredictable moves. Cooperation and signaling. Some firms choose to compete and others choose to cooperate. How do firms signal their intention to cooperate in order to reduce competitive intensity? Short of illegally talking directly to rivals, firms have to resort to signaling. That is, while you can't talk to your competitors on pricing, you can always wink at them. We outline 4 means of such winking. First, firms may enter new markets not necessarily to challenge incumbents, but to seek mutual forbearance by establishing multi-market contact. Thus, M&Es often chase each other, entering one country after another. Airlines that meet in many routes are often less aggressive than airlines that meet in one or a few routes. Second, firms can send an open signal for a truce. As GM faced grave financial difficulties in 2005, Toyota's chairman told the media twice that Toyota would help GM by raising Toyota prices in the US. Toyota's signal could not have been more unambiguous, short of talking directly to GM, which would have been illegal. 3. Sometimes firms can send a signal to rivals by enlisting the help of governments. Although it is illegal to hold direct negotiations with rivals on what constitutes fair pricing, holding such discussions is legal under the auspices of government investigations. Thus, filing an anti-dumping petition or suing a rival does not necessarily indicate a total hostile intent, but rather a signal to talk. When Cisco sued Huawei, Cisco was able to legally discuss a number of strategic issues during settlement negotiations, which were mediated by US and Chinese governments. In the end, Cisco dropped its case against Huawei after both firms negotiated a solution. Last, firms can organize strategic alliances with rivals for cost reduction. Although price fixing is illegal, reducing costs by 10% through an alliance, which is legal, has the same impact on the financial bottom line as collusively raising prices by 10%. Overall, because of the sensitive nature of inter-firm cooperation designed to reduce competition, we do not know a lot about them. However, to the extent that business is both war and peace, managers need to pay as much attention to making peace with rivals as fighting wars against them. Chapter 11, Section 5, Local Firms versus Multinational Enterprises. In this section, we will discuss how local firms fight multinational enterprises or MNEs. While managers, students, and journalists are often fascinated by M&E rivalries such as those between Coca-Cola and Pepsi, Samsung and Sony, and SAP and Oracle, much less is known about how local firms cope when with an M&E attack. Given the broad choices of competing and or cooperating, local firms can adopt one of four strategic postures depending on the industry conditions and the nature of competitive assets. Shown in Figure 11.4, these factors suggest four strategic actions. Figure 11.4, how local firms in emerging economies respond to multinationals. Cell 3 shows how in some industries the pressure to globalize are relatively low, and local firms' strengths lie in a deep understanding of local markets. In this case, local assets where M&Es are weak are leveraged in a defender strategy. For example, facing an onslaught from M&E cosmetics firms, a number of local Israeli firms turned to focus on products suited to the Middle Eastern climate and managed to defend their turf. Ahava has been particularly successful partly because of its highly unique components that are extracted from the Dead Sea that M&Es cannot find elsewhere. In other words, while local firms such as Ahava cede some markets, such as Main Street Cosmetics, to M&Es, they build strongholds in narrower but deeper product markets such as the Dead Sea mud. Cell 4 shows industries where pressures for globalization are relatively low, and local firms may possess some skills that are transferable overseas, thus leading to an extender strategy. This strategy centers on leveraging homegrown competencies abroad. For example, Asian Paints controls 40% of the house paint market in India. Asian Paints develops strong capabilities tailored to this environment, characterized by thousands of small retailers serving numerous poor consumers who only want small quantities of paint that can be diluted to save money. Such capabilities are a winning formula not only in India, but also in much of the developing world. In contrast, M&Es, whose business model typically centers on affluent customers in developed economies, have had a hard time coming up with a profitable low-end product. Cell 1 depicts local firms that compete in industries with high pressure for globalization. Thus, a dodger strategy is necessary. This is largely centered on cooperating through joint ventures with M&Es and sell-offs to M&Es. In the Chinese automobile industry, all major domestic automakers have entered JVs with M&Es, joint ventures. In the Czech Republic, the government sold Skoda to Volkswagen. In essence, to the extent that local firms are unable to successfully compete head-on against M&Es, cooperation becomes necessary. In other words, if you can't beat them, join them. Finally, in Cell 2, some local firms, through a contender strategy, engage in rapid learning, and then expand overseas. A number of Chinese mobile phone makers such as TCL and Bird rapidly caught up with the global heavyweights such as Motorola and Nokia. Domestic firms in China then commanded more than 50% of market share. Following their success at home, TCL and Bird have now entered foreign markets. Particularly in emerging economies, how domestic firms respond is crucial for managers. For example, in China, despite initial dominance, MNEs do not always stay on top. In numerous industries such as sportswear, cellular phones, personal computers, and home appliances, many MNEs have found themselves losing market share to domestic firms. While weak domestic players are washed out, some of the stronger domestic firms not only succeed in the competitive domestic environment, but now challenge MNEs overseas. In the process, they become a new breed of MNEs themselves. The upshot is that when facing the onslaught of MNEs, local firms are not necessarily sitting ducks guaranteed to lose. Chapter 11, Section 6, Debates and Extension. In this section, we will participate in two leading debates concerning competitive dynamics. Debates abound in this sensitive area. Two of the most significant are discussed: competition versus anti-dumping and competitive strategy versus antitrust policy. Competition versus anti-dumping. Two arguments exist against the practice of imposing anti-dumping restrictions on foreign firms. First, because dumping centers on selling below cost, and it is often difficult, if not impossible, to prove the case given the ambiguity concerning cost. The second argument is that if foreign firms are indeed selling below cost, so what? This is simply a hyper-competitive action. When entering a new market, virtually all firms lose money on day one and often in year one. Until some point when the firm breaks even, it will lose money because it sells below cost. Domestically, cases abound of such dumping, which is perfectly legal. We all receive numerous coupons in the mail offering free or cheap goods. Coupon items are frequently sold or given away below cost. Do consumers complain about such good deals? Probably not. If the foreigners are kind enough or dumb enough to sell their goods on our country below cost, why should we complain? One classic response is, what if, through unfair dumping, foreign rivals drive out local firms and then jack up prices? Given the competitive nature of most industries, it is often difficult to eliminate all rivals and then recoup losses by charging higher monopoly prices. The fear of foreign monopoly is often exaggerated by special interest groups who benefit at the expense of consumers in the entire country. Joseph Stiglitz, a Nobel laureate in economics, wrote that anti-dumping duties are simply naked protectionism, and that one country's fair trade laws are often known elsewhere as unfair trade laws. One solution is to phase out anti-dumping laws and use the same standards against domestic predatory pricing. Such a waiver of anti-dumping charges has been in place between Australia and New Zealand, between Canada and the US, and within the EU. Thus, a Canadian firm, essentially treated as a US firm, can be accused of predatory pricing but cannot be accused of dumping in the US. Since anti-dumping is about us versus them, such harmonization represents essentially an expanded notion of us. However, domestically, as noted earlier, a predation case is very difficult to make. In such a way, competition can be fostered, aggressiveness rewarded, and dumping legalized.